Yeah. So I had myself muted, so that's why I didn't hear myself. Now we've got that fixed. We can move on. Jiminy crickets. What an amateur. What a rookie. What I need is Jamie. I need a Jamie off to the side here, and everything will be great. Yeah. Okay. We're all good. So, enough of the preliminaries. Yeah. My name's Anthony Horvath. I'm the host of the Gutencast. Off to an inauspicious beginning here this evening. I had everything all lined up and all ready, and then I muted myself. Sad, distressing. We're going to talk about conspiracy theories tonight with a guest who's been with us before. I don't always cough when I say his name. Dr. Bernard Boll, who is the president of Concordia University in Nebraska. He's been a longtime friend. He's an author, professor, musician, out of the box thinker. He's one of my authors. We publish his book, Missional Moonshots, which you can find a link to in the description. And it turns out we will not be talking about the moon. We thought we were going to talk about the moon today, but he called an audible, so things have changed a little bit. I should mention that there could be chaos. There was an outline for this podcast today, and it's out the window. Uh, we're just gonna see where it ends up. I want to say a few words about this before we get started, and then I'll bring in Dr. Bull. Um, so epistemology is something that has been of interest to me for a long time. Epistemology is the basically the study of how we know what we know, and I think I got my start on it really from something that G.K. Chesterton wrote in his book Orthodoxy about the thought that ends all thought, about how you can consider just about anything. But if you consider something that makes all considering pointless, you've considered too far. I mean, you have to have a bottom. There has to be a ground and an axiom if you want. And one of those axioms, in a way, is that reason is reasonable. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, is it? And C.S. Lewis would eventually say some things about that idea as well, about how we can trust our reason and why, to some degree, we have to. And he eventually also became a mentor of mine as well. So epistemology always been a central theme in my own quest for truth, because even though we have to take reason as an axiom to some degree and in some way with caveats or whatever, to me that still requires an explanation. Like some people like assume it and then they don't think about it anymore. Like it seems to me like that's kind of a important thing. Like if you suddenly decide, if like you believe that you are lately descended from pond smuck, you know, and over time pond smuck turned into you, how do you know that you are possessing more reasoning abilities than the pond smuck? Because the pond smuck only knew enough, if it knew anything, to survive and reproduce, right? That would be the limits of what it was built to do. And you can postulate that all the way out and say that, you know, we're the pinnacle of it, and reason became even more reasonable by careful calibration with reality or whatever. But usually people don't think about it even that far. And I think that we have to have an explanation for it. And to me, that happens to lead to the belief that there is a God, which is not the topic for tonight's episode at all. But it does speak to the question of truth. How do we know it? How what kinds of degrees of certainty can we give to the things that we think are true, and that sort of thing. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about that a lot tonight in different ways. And I'll just say also that we're going to have to talk about what we mean by conspiracy probably pretty quickly. But I did want to say before I brought in Dr. Bull that the phrase conspiracy theory is often used these days really as a weapon to silence debate on something. You just say, "Oh, well, that's a conspiracy theory," and you're on the hook. I mean, who wants to be the guy defending a conspiracy? No, conspiracy theory. That's like the worst. I mean, people will believe almost anything rather than have people believe that they are conspiracy theorists, which I think is really entertaining in some ways, but sad and tragic also. But we'll define that a little bit. But what I wanted to kind of call attention to is that this world is a big world. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of facts to dissect and um, absorb, and it should not surprise us really that it is hard to get a grasp of what the real truth is about just about anything. It shouldn't surprise you, and the fact that the internet has made it even more available um, is more reason to be a little bit more charitable to people who entertain things that you personally might view as a conspiracy theory. So, with that brief monologue in, it's time to listen to somebody else. And we've got Dr. Bull. He's ready to go. How you doing, Dr. Bull?
Doing all right.
Awesome. Okay. I'm just going to do my quick sound check. Make sure that everyone can hear you just as well as I can hear you. You know. Oh, I need you to say something else because there isn't
I'll say
as much
something
lag.
else. Hi.
Thank you.
How's it going?
All right. It'll come. There's not as much lag as usual. There we go. Okay, so we can just set that aside. Hey, look, when you're doing a podcast on a shoestring and you're your own tech guy, that's just the way it is. Okay. So, Dr. Bull, this podcast topic was your idea. I didn't really have anything. Well, I had I had some ideas, but they were a little heavy, and I wasn't feeling heavy, and or not that heavy, we should say. Um, I thought, well, let's just see if Dr. Bull has anything of interest, and that was a mistake, I think. So, well, I have no idea where tonight's conversation is going to go, but we will all discover together. Do you want to say a few words to get us off on the right foot?
Sure. So here's the background, and I know it's we're going to try to have a respectable conversation about conspiracy theories or conspiracy facts, obviously, but my hidden agenda is really this. A number of years ago, actually for the last 10 or 20 years, I've been really intrigued by intentional designs of what's called alternate reality games, where there's sort of this intersection of reality and a game, and you don't even know if you're in one. There's an old movie called The Game that actually is a kind of dark movie in a way. It's a premise where this guy gets a card for his birthday and from his brother, and it's just an address, and he shows up, and it's this organization, kind of cryptic organization that just surveys him and does assessments of his uh, his memories and cognitive abilities and all this stuff, and then they say thank you for your time, and they send him home, and he gets home, and all of a sudden someone breaks into his house, and the game has started, but he doesn't know it's a game, and the whole movie just kind of plays out that way, right? So um, I became kind of intrigued by this idea of these sorts of environments, and it eventually led me into a long time fascination with treasure hunts. The old kind of treasure hunt, where the alleged pirate hides a treasure with the hope of coming back and getting it later, and in that case, other people, maybe the pirate dies, and then there's a legend, maybe a map that he had hidden, and people find the map, and the map is the sole clue in order to find your way to the treasure hunt. And the very first example of this in kind of our recent history that sort of began the treasure hunt genre in film and literature is Treasure Island, which is,
Mm.
it starts with a treasure map, right? That's where we're introduced, where X marks the spot. And and so that's kind of grown and developed, and there have been a number of these games that have emerged, alternate reality games and treasure hunts that have emerged. In fact, there are several alternate reality games that are active right now, and no one knows who started them or designed them. Some people think it's like the CIA has created these cryptographs for brilliant people to solve, and if they solve them, then they get a job
Mm.
interview or something. But no one really knows. And others of them are just more playful, and they're introductions, like when the Da Vinci Code movie came out, they created an alternate reality game, and I remember doing it at the time just because I was intrigued by the design. And at the end was you found a phone number and you called it, and it was the author that was kind
Did
of
it
inviting you
did
to
it
the movie.
say always remember to drink your Ovaltine?
Yeah, right. That's right. So so anyway, more recently though, there have been some treasure hunt designs, and treasure hunts come in two big forms. One is sort of the treasure that's been hidden, and it's like a sunken treasure, and people go find it, and there's no real designer of the treasure hunt. It's really a treasure that's hidden, and then people have to go hunt for it. But the more contemporary version is a more kind of contrived, planned hunt, where there's an actual person who's acquired some items of value and hides them. There was one all the way back in the 80s that's still going on. There are 13 treasures around the country, 12 or 13. I think three have been discovered. Um, and they're each pieces of art or something like that. More recently, though, um, was a guy, I think it was actually already back in 1988 that he was starting to think of it, was a guy named Forrest Finn. And there's even a Netflix documentary on this where um, he thought he was dying of cancer, and he decided that he was going to hide a treasure somewhere in these five states in the Rocky Mountains. And he published a memoir, and just kind of, I think it was self published, perhaps, I'm not sure. Brought it to a local bookstore. It kind of expanded. People found out about it. There's a poem in there that is supposed to lead you to the treasure. And it actually led to a nationwide treasure hunt where I don't know the total number of people, but there were a ton of people who started going and hunting for this. And this guy had not really designed it with a lot of details. It's not like it was a game design where he said, here are the rules, here are your boundaries, don't go here, don't go there, don't die, things like that. He kind of kept it open. And in fact, some people did die searching for this
Yeah.
treasure. And he decided to become a participant in the game design. So he actually got better, and he started interacting with the treasure hunters. So people would text him or email him, and if you watch the documentary, there was at least one person he invited over to his house and he talked to, and so he's having these interactions. He goes into he does some interviews. The police, I understand, start pleading for him to actually just call the whole thing off because some people were getting hurt or dying, or they were worried about more injuries. And if you watch the full documentary, you can kind of see how the story plays out. But eventually, in I think it's like 2022 or so, somewhere around there, um, the treasure is found by this really analytical minded guy. I think he was an engineer or a programmer or something like that. And and of course, after it happened, though, um, and after it was discovered, there were some other controversies that emerged too. But he actually got sued, there was a guy from France who claimed that it was a scam and that he had maybe given the location of the treasure to this guy who discovered it. Which, by the way, I think is intriguing because it's not like he owes anyone anything. If he wanted to
Right.
tell someone where the treasure was, and I'm pretty sure that's not illegal, you know. Um,
All right.
um, but but anyway, it was a kind of conspiracy that emerged, and this got me really intrigued with the culture of these communities that emerge. And my background being an ethnographic researcher, I study communities and cultures. I've studied hacker culture. I've studied like pro anorexia websites. I've studied the Branch Davidians kind of post the raid, and I've studied different kinds of digital communities. And so informally, not in any formal way, I like kind of following these communities and seeing how they think and how they talk. And what's really fascinating is you get people from all walks of life. I mean, you have people with PhDs in bioengineering and people who dropped out of school in high school. And you have people kind of all education levels, different skill levels. Um, and so it got me really intrigued. And now there are a couple of other active treasure hunts. One guy who was on the Forest Fin treasure hunt has now created a treasure hunt of his own. He collected a bunch of precious items during COVID, and he published a book called "There's Treasure Inside." It's a guy named John Collins Black, and there's a national treasure hunt, and there are 5 boxes hidden around the country, and all the clues to the treasures are allegedly in the book.
Hmm.
Um, and and so now I'm following this one, and so much so even that I even create a series of videos for that treasure hunt community. But I have an agenda. So I guess I'm intrigued by the treasure hunting. But what interests me about it is that I think it's a really fascinating phenomenon in modern society because it actually clashes with a lot of the kind of cultural relativism that's so predominant in society, and this idea that it's all about passion and all about your what you want to be true, and if you want something and believe it to be true, it's going to happen. And what's that law of attraction kind of thing. And but we have all these different kinds of theories and ideas, but a treasure hunt is completely intolerant and unforgiving of all that stuff.
Hmm.
There is a treasure that's hidden in a specific physical location, and there are clues given by the designer. And if you decide that you're just going to make the clue mean what you want it to mean, some reader response kind of thing, or you
Yeah.
interpret it in some flowery way, it does, it will not lead you to the treasure, right? There's
Right.
no way that you're going to just will your way to the treasure. You actually have to be a disciplined thinker. You have to
Excuse
learn
me.
to overcome cognitive biases and logical fallacies. You have to learn how to think with precision, how to be dispassionate, how to show, to actually set the passion aside and actually be kind of systematic about this. And in fact, when you see the people who often discover these treasure hunts, it's usually like engineers or people that have a discipline of thinking in that way. And uh, and 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 you have to put all of your kind of like ideological sort of political agendas and other things like that aside. They don't really matter. What matters is what's true and what's false.
Yeah. Yeah.
and um and then at the end, you show up and you find the treasure, or you were wrong, and it humbles you, and then you have to cultivate some persistence and go back to the drawing board and try again.
Or you
And
die.
right. And so this is really why the reason I brought up the conspiracy thing is because when you watch people and the way they operate in these treasure hunts, all of the dispositions, all of the ways of thinking that lead to conspiracy theories are rampant.
Hmm.
I mean, you see them all over the place. And the thing is that's humbling is all of those things are part of all of us. Like the way that I believe God designed our brain, that there are kind of benefits and downsides to certain ways of thinking. Like if you use a way of thinking out of context, it becomes a vice. Um, and and so like some examples of things are like you know in 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 this modern landscape politically, for example, some people liked Biden, some people liked Trump. And so if they would say something, um, and it's the person that you like, you believe them.
Mm.
And if and if it's a person that you don't like, then they're wrong. But that's not how clear thinking works, right? I mean, the reality is someone you don't like can have a good point, and someone you do like can have a really bad point and can be wrong. And yet, what we see in the kind of public discourse so often is not this kind of dispassionate approach or thinking, but it's like, I'm going to argue for my candidate and my person, and they could do no wrong. And in the process, it almost leads to what looks like a conspiracy theory where people find themselves defending something that 2 years ago they would have admitted was kind of unrealistic or absurd. Um, and so anyway, that's a little bit of why I suggested this topic, and I thought it would be kind of fun for us to actually pick some things that are alleged conspiracy theories, and some may actually be legitimate conspiracies. And I would define. You mentioned about definition. I would say that a conspiracy is when one or more people secretly plan and act together to achieve some kind of hidden goal. Um, and there's usually some kind of deception in it. And a conspiracy theory is, a belief or a claim about some events or some kind of something that happens secretly, but without really sound, verifiable evidence. You continue to kind of hold on to it, or you conflate. This is a common logical fallacy. People conflate a lot of evidence with strong evidence, right?
Sure.
So I find 50 reasons why this is true. They're all 50 bad reasons, but because it's a list of 50, it must make my case stronger than if I just had 3 really compelling reasons. So anyway, that's my background. That's why I thought it might be a fun conversation for us. And I was very confident that even if it wasn't particularly structured, knowing you, Tony, that we'd have a great conversation about this.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, I feel like I need to say that, okay, I was inspired by the Fen treasure, but not by this podcast. So, like, I have a series called the Birth Fang series. I'm currently writing book 3 and halfway through book 4. And I have a lot of haters who wish that I'd just get it over with. But I'm delayed slightly because I'm not lying. I actually thought about going around the country and putting in little pieces of treasure that could only be found if you were a close reader of my books. So I already had that idea, and now I don't want to say it's ruined, knowing that so many other people are doing it. But maybe I'll just finish book 4 and move on with my life.
Now, Tony, I can tell that you're not a salesperson,
I
because if
know,
you were, the way you would frame that is say, I had this idea, and I'm not telling you if it's real or not.
right? Yeah,
There may be clues.
yeah. The sales part or the self promotion part's never been my forte, which is weird because if you look at me, you're like, well, he's all self promotion. Well, I don't know. That's just the persona. Yeah. So, yeah, something you're gonna say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something about that that's really intriguing, though, because while it might seem like something childish, like why, I'm not speaking here on behalf of my role as a university president.
Uh
I'm
huh.
doing this independent of that, right? But people might say, "Wow, someone who's been an academic and who's been an administrator, like, why would they be interested in talking about something like this? It seems like it's sort of on the on the edges or whatever, or why would he have a hobby or an interest in treasure hunts?" And it's because I look for wholesome examples of activities today that can point us to truths that really matter, and that can cultivate virtues that are really important, and that can call out vices that are harmful to us. And that it's actually a palliative to sort of the place we find ourselves in our culture today. That's why I actually think that kind of treasure hunting, as I said before, because it's really unforgiving of some of the lines of thinking that have persisted, especially for the
Yeah.
last years or so.
Well, in a way, you don't even. I mean, I understand the appeal of the treasure hunt part of it for sure, from the for exactly the same reasons that you're talking about. But you don't have to go too far. Like agriculture is just filled with examples of that. If you plant corn, you will get corn. You'll not get a soybean, and you can't wish your way to a soybean from a corn seed. And one of the other things too, and I do produce farming. Some of the parables about uh, the weeds coming in, and they're like, well, should we tear these up? And it's like, no, you'll kill the plant if you pull the weeds. We'll wait till the harvest. Man, I've been dealing with weeds, and I know exactly what he's talking about. I just pulled up a tomato plant by accident the other day because I was going aggressively for a weed. And you know what? There's no do overs, right?
Mhm.
I mean, well, actually, I could probably figure out a way to get a tomato plant to come back, but severely stunted anyway. But it really speaks to the the general point that you're making is that there are things in the world where clear thinking is is your only way to encounter reality.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. You don't have to like it. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something that we all struggle with. I mean, the part I like about it as well is clear thinking. It's not like it's something that you figure out. No, I've mastered clear thinking and every part of my life is clear thinking. That's why I like the cognitive biases alongside the logical fallacies, is because um, it's not like you can really avoid falling into some of these cognitive biases. You will. It's just
Sure.
learning how to get out of them or learning how
Right.
to recognize them. Like, a popular one is called the gambler's fallacy. And the gambler's fallacy is this idea of the person that sits at a slot machine and they press the button. I guess in the old days they like pull the lever, and they get this. They develop these superstitions, and they sit at the same slot machine because they've put so much money in it that it's bound to pay off the next time. And we
Mm.
know, like, probability wise, you're starting over every time you put a new coin in, right? It's not like you're increasing your chances by doing the same thing. It's like starting the game over anew. But people fool themselves into thinking, oh, it's bound to pay off. Or people will try the same solution to a problem in their life over and over and over again, thinking that, well, if I just keep trying, I'm bound, I'm due to be
Mhm.
successful. And while there are some areas of life where that works a little bit, like if you close your eyes and you just randomly throw a ball in the air on a basketball court, I mean, are you bound to get one in eventually? Maybe, but it's a big court, and um,
Right.
and there's a better way of getting the ball in the hoop than closing your eyes and randomly throwing it. But that gambler's fallacy, we all fall into, where even people I know, they joke about it, but it's almost like they believe it a little bit with regard to where they sit at an athletic event or whether they even show up or not. And oh man, if I would have shown up, they would have won, or I
Mhm.
showed up and so they lost. And you find really rational people that have developed this, or the straw man fallacy that we all get caught up in, which is if we have a position that we hold onto and we're dealing with someone else that disagrees with us, we like to reframe their argument in a weaker way, right? Um, and the way through that, obviously, one of the ways is actually to steel man, where when someone makes an argument, try to make their argument better for them. Try to give the best possible version
Mhm.
of their argument, and then debunk that.
Yeah.
If you can, or maybe they've
Right.
convinced you that they're right. Um, and a lot of these are really really kind of intriguing to me, or like the effect where um, you're looking for a car and you find a particular model that you like, and then you get on the road and now you see that everywhere, and it just shows up everywhere. This is a classic lead in to a conspiracy theory, and I actually had this happen to me years ago. I was coaching high school cross country, and there was a kid who came out and ran for track, but he was mainly a soccer player, and um, he had never run before, but he was really fast, and he ran a 4:44 mile the first time I ever saw him run, and for some reason that number 4:44 just stuck in my head, and for the next 20 years I still see the number 4:44. I cannot miss it.
Hmm.
If the number 4:44 is present, I will pay attention to it, and as much as I know logically that that is not some kind of cosmic message to me, or like if I look at my watch and it says it's 4:44, I'm like, uh-oh, something special is supposed to happen. Like, I mean, like even my mind can be, even though I know this about it, um, our minds are kind of, we can be tempted to fall into it, which is actually, there's even another fallacy called the GI Joe fallacy, which goes from the old cartoon, GI Joe cartoon, and at the end it had this little tagline like, knowing is half the job or something like that.
Oh, you just that's no. Knowing is half the battle.
There you go. Knowing is half the battle. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the phenomenon, is that's not actually true. Like I can know all of these fallacies and fall into every single one of them. Like it's not
Yeah.
it maybe it could be true in the show. I don't want to ruin it for people who really love the GI
Well,
Joe.
I have to differ with you on one thing as far as the gambler fallacy goes.
Yeah.
I think at this point it's well established that if you want the stock price in the company to go down, you will have me buy it.
See, I'm telling you, the fallacy even finds its way into the mind of Tony Horvath.
I feel like I can document this one. It's-
Huh?
yeah. In fact,
Well,
I
we
could
might have to do
almost
some more research to find out the real cause of it then.
right. Yeah, some bad stock pick. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyway, so we won't go too far down that rabbit hole.
So, what's interesting is what I had suggested, and maybe if we want to do this, I mean, we can just talk more about cognitive biases too. But what I'd suggested is that we each come with a couple of
Hmm.
alleged conspiracy theories, and maybe it'll lead us into a discussion about the actual conspiracy. But I'm really interested in the meta conversation, the sort of thinking
Right.
about thinking part of it, which
Yeah.
is how does it work on us? Like, how does that theory lead some people to kind of believe it? And because I don't know what is a conspiracy theory or not sometimes. In our modern world, it's increasingly challenging to discern sometimes
Right.
what's real and what's not real, especially in our information age. And I think there's a measure of humility. But whenever someone is incredibly certain about something for which there's limited evidence, well, that's a sign to me they might be falling into a conspiracy theory trap.
Yeah. So I gave not an objection, but a hesitation in my own introductory monologue when there is a danger of calling something a conspiracy theory before we ourselves have actually taken the time to evaluate the merits of whatever that view is.
Right.
So, I mean, there could be any number of those. One of the conspiracy theories that I considered bringing up was whether or not Roosevelt knew the Japanese were going to bomb Pearl Harbor. And I thought it would be a good example because I know people call it a conspiracy theory, but I have no idea. like, like I've heard people confidently say, "Oh, it's ridiculous," and I've heard people confidently say, "No, there's reasons for thinking that," but I don't know, so I'm not comfortable not really calling it conspiracy theory myself personally, but others clearly do.
Yeah. I think part of why it becomes challenging too is there's a really heavy emphasis on appeal to authority in some circles
Hmm.
today. Talk about kind of, logical flaws and things like that. Of course, the reliability, the veracity of a source matters. That's still a good skill for us to cultivate and figure out how to determine whether something is a reputable source or not, but it's not always as clear cut. And this idea of just trusting um, the historians who've studied it more closely than I have. I mean, there are some limitations to that, but also we don't want to throw out the fact that there are some people that are more informed about it and they've studied it.
Yeah.
So, you
Right.
can kind of trust but verify, I guess, when you're
Right.
dealing with authority figures on something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll come back around to that. So one of my conspiracy theories that I decided on was the conspiracy that Jesus did not exist, Jesus of Nazareth, and not a disbelief that he was God or a disbelief that he was the savior of all mankind and all that, but like a disbelief that he just didn't even exist, wasn't a real person of history. And I thought, and I actually tagged a guy in the description whose video I watched earlier today, and that was so I expect him to show up in the comments, but he has a lot more subscribers than me. He might not want to give me any attention either, so that could happen. Anyway, I've had lots of conversations with people over the years who say, "Well, it's not even really sure that Jesus existed." Like you're talking about all this gospel stuff and whatever. The historians don't even think he was like real. One time, so my argument in a nutshell on that was that they tend to use, we'll say, special dispensations of logic or reason. Like they think that the evidence ought to be overwhelmingly unique to verify that Jesus existed. Whereas my position is I'm just going to use the regular tools of historical inquiry.
Right.
I'm not asking for a special exemption. They are. And in one of the cases that still is with me today, like I just can't even believe it. I actually managed to persuade an atheist that not only that according to the historical norms that Jesus existed, but that he actually did die and rise from the dead. I persuaded an atheist of this. And I thought, well, that's doesn't happen very often. And he said, but that only shows that aliens exist and he was abducted. Either he was abducted or he was an alien himself and has left the earth. So what cognitive bias do you think that reflects?
Yeah, well, there are a few of them that are possibilities, right? So one that we're all drawn into is the bandwagon effect,
Mm-hmm.
which is we oftentimes find as a shortcut to clear and deep thinking, affiliating with a group of people that we have some affinity to, and um, and so we use that as a shortcut for careful thinking and
Right.
analysis. From
Yeah.
a Christian perspective, there's this passage of um, you know Paul goes to this town called the Bereans, and it says that the Bereans were of more noble character because they examined the scriptures daily. I'm sorry, it was in Acts, the author of Acts, Luke or
Right.
whoever. But it says the Bereans were of more noble character because they examined the scriptures daily to see if what Paul said was true. So this idea was that Paul was not saying, "Believe me because I'm Paul."
Mm-hmm.
He was challenging them on the base of a shared, trusted source, the scriptures, and and the bandwagon effect sort of bypasses and goes with you're going to give greater credibility to the people that you've gotten to know and you have an affinity for. So I think there's always the possibility in each of us to fall into that. And I don't think it's entirely unhelpful. I mean, in some aspects of life, it's kind of helpful. And I mean, it happens in families in a healthy way. Like we try to teach our kids to do things that are safe and not harmful and so forth. And they don't necessarily have all the reasons for it. We want them to get on the family bandwagon, right? Um,
Sure.
um, so I think there's that. There's also the availability bias, which is you study certain sources and you haven't studied all the sources, but you read a really good book on it. And so now that book is kind of your anchor for
Yeah.
all of your thinking. And it's
Right.
the information that's available to you that you use to determine what's true or what's not true, but you really haven't broadened your study enough to consider other possibilities. I mean, I've run into that regularly over the years when I'm talking to people on faith matters, where they would make claims about Christianity, for example, and they'd never read the scriptures. They'd never even read a single book by a reputable theologian, or a
Right.
church historian or anything like that. Like the thing like even John Warwick Montgomery's little book called History and Christianity, that talks
Hmm.
about the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah.
Lord, Liar, Lunatic, and Legend, I think, are the four that he uses maybe in that book. Um, or the old Josh McDowell book. Like they hadn't read anything. And the only thing they'd read was maybe one book that was recommended by someone from their tribe that painted a very, very different picture. Or they'd watched the Da Vinci Code. And so they were pretty
Right.
convinced that if Jesus did exist, he married Mary Magdalene and they had babies or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that actually brings up a memory from back when we were teaching together. It wasn't the Da Vinci Code, but it was Stigmata, a movie
Yeah.
which I haven't seen, but I was led to believe by my students um, that it talks about the Gnostic Gospels and how the churches suppressed them. And so I had eighth graders at the time. So maybe we weren't teaching together.
No, we were. I remember that time. I
Okay.
remember the movie came out.
All right.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I remember these two eighth graders came in, and they were I taught religion. They were just hot. They're like, "Is this true?" I actually they didn't even ask me if it was true. They were accusatory. They're like, more like, how dare they suppress books of the Bible? And I was like, well, okay, what was the book? And it was the Gospel of Thomas.
Yep.
And so I had this glorious moment where I said, "Oh, this Gospel of Thomas," and I reached back on my shelf and I pulled it off, and it said, "Here you go." And like the looks on their faces was like, it wasn't like a humiliation. That wasn't what we were going for. It was like almost like more like a restoration. Like they had in the course of 24 hours, they'd had their faith shattered completely. And then now, like, oh, the truth is not at all what I seemed it was. And that's a good example of how maybe the bandwagon effect, I think, in some ways, in which our culture feeds various ideas, and because it has mainstream credibility, just by virtue of movie makers not being afraid to put them in their movie or whatnot, people think they are actually serious propositions, and just that a movie is not a good source of truth.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know in terms of there's the appeal to emotion that obviously is it can be a logical fallacy, right? Where
Right.
people conflate um, rhetoric with evidence, like
Right.
sometimes, or more kind of, so there's this idea where people tell you a story that's really vivid and compelling. um, it's not necessarily grounded in any kind of historical fact or stronger evidence, but um, but it gets you thinking about it. I think so. There's a term called narrative bias that that I think is used in a couple of different ways. But in cognitive psychology, narrative bias is this idea that we have a bias to believe something, to give greater weight to something, simply because it's presented as a emotionally packed, engaging story.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
we see this in modern debates oftentimes. Like you see this in the social media debates, sort of the gotcha kind of experience, where someone says something that's kind of a jab. It may be even ad hominem attack at the other person. And some people are like, "Ooh, he won. He won the debate." Well, he didn't win anything. He just insulted the other
Yeah.
person. He
Right.
didn't prove that anything was true, right?
Yeah.
He just proved that he could insult someone effectively in a way that would engage the audience. And films are particularly compelling that way. I remember watching an old movie called What Dreams May Come. Robin
Uh,
Williams was in it,
yeah,
and it was this. The premise was that his wife died and went to hell, and he died and went to heaven. And heaven is depicted as this place where um, you can make anything be true. You kind
yeah,
of will it into existence. But he missed his wife, and he wanted to bring her back from hell, and he was told that's impossible. But everything's possible in this false depiction of heaven, and so
yeah,
he travels across purgatory or whatever it is, and he decides that it's better to live in eternity in hell with his wife than to live in heaven without her. And so he crawls into this dark corner with her, and the next thing you know, the scene switches and it's two children holding hands playing, and they've been reincarnated, right?
right.
and
Yep.
uh and so they tell this story, and I've talked to people who've seen the film, and they kind of liked the way that heaven was depicted. They sort of wanted to believe that that's what heaven was, but it
Hmm.
wasn't grounded in any kind of
Right.
actual truth claim. It was just a picture that was painted, and you know, and that's what we see. I had that happen a lot when I was a teacher, a theology teacher, in the high school, middle school level. In fact, I it happened so frequently that when I was teaching a topic from the scriptures that I knew, for example, a passage that would have angels depicted in it, I would start and I'd say, "Tell me everything you know about angels," and I'd just write on the board, and we'd look at it. 90% of what was on the board was from movies and not
Yeah.
from, from the scriptures. Um,
I had a similar exchange when I was teaching seniors for marriage and commitment because they did not like what I said biblical love was, and they argued with me. And that was the year of the seniors who had been through 7 religion teachers, if you remember that.
I didn't know it was that many, but that's a lot.
I don't think it was 7 all in one year, but it's 7 and but anyway, it was that group is the point. So yes, they argued vociferously. So finally, as one day I was like, okay, all right, you tell me what what love is, and I wrote down a list, or excuse me, they gave me the things just like you did with the angels, right? And then I looked at the list. I couldn't tell you what they were now, and then I just went and matched each item to a Disney movie. You know, 'cause it was so perfect, and I was like, well, I mean, you can, and I mean, I basically left it with them. I mean, you can, I said you can get your views about love from a corporate conglomerate that's just trying to make money if you want, but don't tell me that it's true. If we're going to talk about it, truth, that can't be what we do. And that was probably the only time that class was silent. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
memories.
right. Well, I mean, that's part of how we navigate these cognitive biases is to just bring them to light in
Yeah.
ourselves and in others. So that's what you
Right.
did, right? You just, in a simple way, you help them see something that they hadn't noticed about themselves, um, and about how their mind was working and how their brain was working, and you at least left them with a good thought to consider. Um, it's that's why I'm really drawn to these kind of cognitive biases, which go beyond sort of the traditional kind of classical logical fallacies. Is is I see myself and others making less than ideal decisions sometimes because we're caught in these traps, and we just don't recognize them. And if you recognize them, you don't know your way out, but at least you know you're trapped, and so that you
Mm,
can start to figure out some ways to go beyond it. The one I mentioned before about you don't like someone, so you just downplay their phrases. I think the cognitive bias term for that is reactive devaluation. um, and
okay.
um, and it's a problem anywhere, and it's kind of can sometimes be paired with something called the backfire effect, which is you come to a meeting, for example, and you have an idea or a proposition. Maybe there's a problem and you have a proposed solution. And you've thought about it for a while, so you've started to get emotionally attached to the idea. even though you don't really acknowledge it or think about it as an emotional attachment, but you like the idea. And then you introduce it and someone challenges it and they propose an alternative. And 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 instead of trying to solve the problem, you're now on a completely different mission. My mission is no longer to solve the problem. My mission is to win this debate, right? Now my mission is to prove to them that my idea is the best idea. I don't even care if it is the best idea anymore. I
Right.
just want to win.
Yeah.
Now, we wouldn't say that to ourselves consciously. In fact, if I did say that to myself consciously, that might be enough to wake me up and realize that I'm caught up in the backfire effect and I need to back
Yeah.
off and be humble, right?
Yeah. I wish I could joke that I would do that, but no, even I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel
I,
like before we go on, I kind of set you up for your next conspiracy theory, with the AIRO, with my story about the alien abduction.
oh, there you go. Hey,
But
that's a good one.
yeah,
And by the way, to the we probably shouldn't leave people hanging too much on the one that you mentioned.
right,
This claim that Jesus never existed. I mean, just an invitation for people who are listening. It does not take much work to find a handful of books from some of the most reputable scholars you
yeah,
can find. Again, not just appeal to authority. Just you can
right,
look at a variety of sources and read about it, and you will find that the vast majority of serious scholars don't question the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth. They may disagree about
yeah.
different aspects or something, but um, that is an incredible minority viewpoint of serious scholars who've done a lot of research in that area.
So can I push back on that?
Sure.
That'd be all right.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it.
yes. So that matters. The way that you just presented it, that matters to a lot of people. You know
Yeah.
that the um, serious scholars don't
Yeah.
entertain
Right.
it, right? But we're not in an age when that matters to a lot of people, and they can go online and they can find whatever they want at any moment. And so I will pose a slightly different way of answering it, because I do think that we shouldn't just leave it just the way that we did. Um,
Sure.
but to reiterate that you don't need to invoke special standards. We're not asking anyone to do that, because our contention is that Christianity is grounded in history, actual historical facts, in a way that pretty much no other world religion is, as far as like its founding, you know, uh, facets. I'm not really sure how to say that. Um, and so, if you might, for example, have you heard of the Testimonium Flavium? You familiar with that? Yeah, that's Josephus. And so some people will say that that was corrupted by Christians or whatever. But that's not the only reference to Jesus that Josephus makes, right? There's another one that's perfectly innocent and tame. Like, if all you're trying to do is ascertain whether or not he existed, you've got a little piece right there.
Right.
And so I would also add, and this is by no means like the complete answer to this question. Hope no one thinks that. But one of the things that people often do is they're like, well, where are the extra biblical evidences? And that's why Josephus might come up, right? And they set aside the New Testament books themselves, but they also set aside the dozens of other books, epistles, letters by Clement, Barnabas, all these other people, and the people, they act like they don't even, a lot of them don't know they exist, right? That's why I'm mentioning them. You know, oh, oh, there you are.
Lost you for a
Um,
second.
yeah. And so one of the things that people say, and you can, if you know the name of this cognitive bias, I'd be glad to hear it. But like they'll say, well, we can't trust those people because those people actually believe what they say,
Right.
which to me is like bringing a witness on the witness stand and having the the adversarial attorneys say, we can't trust this witness because he believes what he said he saw. It's like we need a witness who doesn't believe he saw what he saw. I mean, so what's the cognitive bias there? What do you think?
Well, I think the logical fallacy is just the moving the goalposts is what they're doing,
Sure.
right? Right, because I think all they're doing is, and that's a strategy that some people use, is set the standard for convincing me so high that it's impossible for you to convince me,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, and a- and I think that's part of it there. But this idea to somehow say that you can't believe anyone because they have beliefs or biases,
You
well,
wouldn't
there's
believe
no
anyone.
source that you're going to run
Right.
into that isn't sifted through, that isn't kind of coming through a human being with beliefs and biases and values and things like that.
Right.
um so yeah, no, absolutely. And the serious scholar thing, I think I appreciate you bringing it up this way. The reason I say that though is just that, um I'm not saying just outsource your thinking to another person, but be willing to check out the resources that really thoughtful people have put together, because that's where you're going to discover the kinds of things like you just
Right.
discussed. They might not
Yeah.
even know that there's this whole collection of church fathers beyond sort of the biblical canon that
Right.
make reference to Jesus. And or I guess sometimes you can certainly invite them to just read more broadly. And as you noted before, like the infancy gospels and some of these other kinds of things, when people actually read them and see, sometimes it's not that hard to
Right.
realize why those didn't end up in the Bible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah. So um, my request to that gentleman that I referred to before was, just apply the standards of history, and he used that as a stepping stone to not the belief, but like the conclusion that, oh, you've convinced me that aliens exist. And at that point, I'm like, all right, uh, you know, I got to step out of this conversation. I got nothing. I
Right.
can't help you anymore. So
Well, and that's obviously we do interpret experiences and things through kind of the prior knowledge and the prior
right.
beliefs that we've cultivated. And the example that I often give is something like, imagine you're standing in a room and there are seven of us in the room, and this translucent figure kind of floating in the room in the middle just sort of appears in front of us, reaches its arms out and says, "Do not be afraid."
Mhm.
You know, what did you just experience? And seven different people could have actually been in the same room and experienced the same thing, and have very different interpretations of what happened on the basis of kind of their pre-existing beliefs and
Right.
how they look at the world. Some saying, well, it was clearly a hologram of some sort. I just haven't figured out the technology that they're using.
Right.
Another immediately assumes it's an angel because of the sort of biblical reference to do not be afraid and the description that they kind of imagined. And and then you have another one that's going to have a psychological assumption. There's, oh man, mass hallucination. There must be something in
Yeah.
the air here. But did we all see the same thing? And if so, how does that work? Um,
But if all seven of them agreed in every detail, you would probably actually doubt them even more.
sure, right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
do you believe in aliens?
Um, so the word belief
Yeah.
is is the problem here,
Right.
right? Because like I hold the word belief differently
Sure.
than some people do. I mean, sometimes I use it sloppily or more broadly.
The way
In
that I
all
just used it. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, if someone says, do you believe in aliens? Like, do they say, do you believe in Jesus? Well, yeah, I do. And that's a different kind of answer than do you believe in aliens? The question to me is, do I believe that there is sufficient evidence to indicate that there is life beyond the planet Earth or something like that? Like if someone frames the question that way,
Hmm.
uh, my response is that I don't know. I don't have I don't have strong evidence. And even if I'm looking at it from a kind of Christian perspective, and I think the scriptures really don't give me much to go on there. So it doesn't say. The C.S. Lewis, that you
Hmm.
referenced before, he has this space trilogy series where I don't know if he wrote about this a lot, or you probably may know more about what he said about like maybe he wrote some nonfiction about his trilogy, but question about whether he was sort of speculating about the possibility that there could have been
Yeah,
other living creatures created somewhere else. I mean, I don't spend a ton of time thinking about thinking about that one or putting a lot of time into it to really have
well,
a thoughtful answer. But that is actually one of the topics I was going to bring up.
what a
I had
coincidence.
the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is an actual government office for what they call UAPs now, right? And um, that's because I guess they need to get rid of the word UFO because that
I guess
sounded a little
so.
bit too out there. And I think there was even just recently a hearing. There was some kind of committee that interviewed people talking about how some of these government officials who thought that there was evidence of something. So I look at it in a pretty dispassionate way. I mean, I try to look at it in a way that's like, okay, so they're making these claims. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to put a lot of time right now into trying to discern which of these claims are valid or not. Um, but but it's out there.
Yeah. So your position in regards to this conspiracy theory is that you don't have a position.
Well, if you framed it religiously, I guess I would be an agnostic, but I don't frame it religiously. I'm talking about it just in terms of evidence or not, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
um because it's not. I would say it in a couple of ways. I'd say it's not fundamental. Like if someone were to provide some irrefutable evidence that they did exist, it wouldn't change my core belief system, or
Hmm.
it would challenge me to think about some things maybe, but it wouldn't challenge my core belief system. My core belief system doesn't depend upon whether this is true or false, you know?
Yeah.
So in that way, it does allow me to be maybe a little more neutral because I don't have a strong desire to want it to be true or false.
Right. Yeah. So if we dovetail into the conspiracy minded folks, and I think there's a real tension on this. Like it used to be UFOs, but now that's got a bad rap to it. But a lot of people who have entertained the notion of UFOs um, do so in part because they just don't trust the government to tell the truth, like
Yeah.
ever, right? And the problem is that the fact that we are even looking at this website right now after my whole lifetime of seeing people mocked is almost like evidence that like maybe they weren't lying before, but they could have given people a bone and said, yeah, okay, we admit there are some crazy things out there, but no, they just said you're the crazy one, and that just fueled even more. I don't know if I want to call it.
Backfire effect. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the part that's hard is when you're engaging in trying to convince someone to maybe consider your side. A common strategy is to not convince them that you're right, but to convince them that you might not be wrong, right?
Hmm. Sure.
Um, so the idea that I want to help them consider the possibility that there could be some truth to my claim, or that not everything that I'm saying is entirely wrong or false. Um, and the flaw though, and where this leads to conspiracy thinking, I think, conspiracy theory thinking, is when I let the possibility of it being true become proof to me that it is true,
Mm.
right? Where I skip a step, a really
Yeah.
big step,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I just I start with this idea that yeah, it's possible. So all right, it must be like because I
Yeah.
really think it'd be cool for for it to be true, and we skip the whole thing. Like okay, there's evidence, and there's going to be, this is the messiness of life. It's going to be competing claims, competing truth claims. People that you like may be saying things that are untrue. People you don't like may be saying things that are true. There's going to be a bombardment of claims coming from every direction, and it does get us in a place where people look for shortcuts to just make some decisions because they want a little bit more certainty in their life.
Mm. It's interesting that the invocation of certainty. I believe you did that earlier as well, and that I don't know if it has a cognitive bias, but I happen to know someone who views certainty of any kind as like a cardinal sin. And well, I mean, to some degree, I think you should proportion your conviction to the evidence and the amount of effort that you've gone to try to understand that evidence. So I personally try not to talk about things that I don't know anything about. So, like,
Right.
for example, this, I don't,
Sure. But pragmatically, though, I mean, if we
yeah,
were talking to that person who thinks that certainty of any type is a vice, um, that doesn't hold up in real life,
right,
right? They
right,
they are acting with certainty every day, all the
correct,
time.
right,
Otherwise, they're not going to get from home to work safely
yeah,
unless they're thinking with certainty about certain traffic rules and things like that. It's like who was it? The Ravi Zacharias. Um, he was a theologian. I think there was some scandal or something maybe that came out later with him. But
right,
he at one point he was talking to someone about sort of the Eastern religious viewpoints and like Hindu viewpoints of this idea of where they would hold to there's not necessarily one truth claim, that there could be sort of multiple things true at the same time that like seem to be
right,
conflicting from a Western logic viewpoint.
yeah,
And Ravi Zacharias one time said or wrote, I can't remember which, maybe both, said something like, "Yes, but even a Hindu looks both ways before crossing the street."
right,
That right.
yep,
um, and so I do think that that's a kind of certainty, right? I mean, you're you've and maybe the person that you're thinking of would has a different way of framing it, like to sort of hold true to their conviction on this matter. But
yeah. Well, it's complicated, we'll say, but I think that in that particular person's case, and he would not be completely unique in this, is it's more like a shield to prevent looking deeper into things where he does not want to go. Like, like that's the answer to all the problems. But on the face of it, though, one of the examples that he might give that is hard not to find reasonable is the conflict in Israel right now with Gaza and whatnot. You've got all these people who are absolutely certain and they're willing to kill for it, right? And you can almost see where in a situation like that, it would be nice if some people were a little bit more lighter on some of their conclusions if they're going to use them to just drill someone in the head. you know
right,
so it's not a completely illegitimate point of view. It just seems selective in how it's supplied sometimes.
yeah, and I think that I mean it's unfair to have the conversation about this person with him not here too
I
much. I
know.
realize, but
Yeah, I'll make
we could
sure he
talk about
sees it though.
this type of position. We can just
Yeah,
talk about the
right,
position more broadly. Is that um, that if I hold to a position that nothing is certain, doesn't that lead me to inaction to the point of something that would be almost universally considered to be immoral? You know what I mean? Like
right,
if if I really hold to like I can't be certain if this is morally right or wrong, so I'm not going to take any action while I
yeah.
watch someone be harmed in some really horrific way or something like that. Um, and I'd be curious to hear the person's position. And the person may say, "Well, I'm not applying it to moral truths. I'm applying it more to um, certain categories of truth claims." Maybe that
Yeah,
might be
yeah,
how
maybe.
some might approach it.
So, is that all you're gonna say about aliens?
Well, I want to hear your thoughts. I mean, that was my initial.
Uh, well, it's complicated. Like, so there are, again, from a Christian viewpoint, personally, and it seems like we're in agreement on this. The scriptures are neutral, in my opinion, um, and the scriptures seem to be pretty clear about not putting too much weight on a single verse or whatnot. So even if I found one verse, it would only be one verse. Uh, he, so to me, what one of the places where I run aground is, and I could maybe get labeled a conspiracy theorist, is when I see a pattern of deception, I can't help but think there's okay, they're shielding something, right? And if it's not aliens, and it might not be, it might be just super advanced technology that they don't that we possess, or someone in the world possesses, and they don't want anyone to know about. That's entirely plausible. But there's a there, and I get offended when people tell me that there's no there when clearly there must be a there of some kind. The All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, like straight out of Men in Black, right? Who came up with this name? You know, it's like, and
Right.
they've shown some videos that even they have said, all right, we really can't explain this. So I guess you would say I'm tentatively leaning towards, well, I'll just say this. I think there's a there.
Sure. So I don't think that I would not personally assume that it's a conspiracy theory, um, to think that there are secrets being held that are relevant to these questions, that there are things that are not being disclosed, but I don't know where they lead. Like
Yeah.
whether, right? I mean, that's the idea here is, some people would speculate that there are advanced technologies, that there's a kind of technological race that's happening between countries, and
Right.
that it could be that some of this is being kept confidential because, for protection militarily or other things like that. And so I think there that one could say, okay, it appears as if there are some claims, and no one is willing to say explicitly. Even if you hear some of these interviews, they say, I cannot speak about that, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
unwilling to
Right.
speak about that. So it's not as if you're even speculating that there's a secret. They just told you, yes, there's a secret. We just don't
Right.
know the nature of the secret, is
Yeah.
where I hold. And I think it could be a pretty mundane and um, non-movie worthy explanation that they're keeping secret, and there could be something that's maybe more intriguing to people.
Yeah. So I do have a theological take on it, but I'm almost afraid to bring it up. But
Uh-huh.
uh I'll just lay it out to you very quickly. So I believe that there are certain virtues that can only exist if circumstances warrant. So, for example, I never pray for patience because God just sends annoying people into my life.
Hmm.
It just right. But how can you be patient if you didn't have something to test that, right? But it's patience is a virtue, but also so is courage. Courage is a virtue as well, and you can't have courage without danger of some kind. But I believe in a uh, uh, Genesis the way it was written, and there was no sin for a time, but I believe there would have been courage. There would have been before the fall reasons for people to show courage.
Uh-huh.
And my conjecture in that is that there might be something in the deep recesses of space, kind of like Lewis's Hanakra of the first book, Out of the Silent Planet, just waiting to reveal itself so that the son of Adam can show courage. So it's a possibility.
Well, that's a very literary way to think about it.
I
I think that
suppose.
Tolkien would, if you were hanging out with Tolkien and the other Inklings and hanging out in that pub, I think that that would have made for a good conversation for them.
Oh yeah, I think they would have. I think they would have loved it. All right, so you have another conspiracy though. We got about
uh,
15 minutes on the scheduled time. So
about how many minutes?
if we stay according to the schedule, 15 minutes.
That's hilarious because my last one is called the 15-minute city.
What a coincidence.
Coincidence or conspiracy, who knows?
I know. I
But
think not. Yeah.
so this is an interesting one too that I find intriguing. So, there's you can actually check it out at 15minutecity.com and just click the about, and there are a few thinkers and city planners and others who have proposed this idea that everyone living in a city should, I'm just reading from it, should have access to essential urban services within a 15-minute walk or bike. The 15-minute city project is designed to help access focused urban transformations be what we need them to be: ambitious, inclusive, measurable, and effectively implemented. So I'm not arguing for or against the 15-minute city, right?
All
I'm just
right.
saying, so this is someone who's put together this idea. Now, there is a group of people though who've come and stepped forward and said, "Yeah, we know what this is. This is a conspiracy. This is a plan to get people congregated into more isolated urban areas so that the surveillance state can take over, so that we can control people, we can take away their cars, we can control and manipulate people's lives more. That it's really a path to a totalitarian dystopian future, and that this person who's introduced it is clearly part of the conspiracy, and that's why he's casting the vision for this to move forward. Right now,
Yeah.
the way I would unpack this though is I would say, okay, there's a guy who has an idea of a 15-minute city, and he may most certainly has values about wanting to reduce the carbon footprint and other kinds of values and considerations that are informing him. And the other side uh, are probably arguably correct that if you had people living in this really kind of constrained area, that if someone were in charge and had the power, they could more easily manipulate or control people living in an area like that. So I don't deny that reality, that those two things. The question is there adequate evidence to suggest that this man is part of causing that totalitarian dystopian future to happen, and that he's intentionally trying to make it happen? Because now we're getting to assuming motives and that he's part of some secret group that's trying to make this happen. And that's where I think we jump into the conspiracy theory place, where um, I suppose it's possible. And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a group of people somewhere. We have a lot of sinister things that happen in our world, where there are a group of sinister people who would love to take advantage of something like this and many other things to try to accomplish unpleasant ends.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is where I would say it becomes a conspiracy theory for me to jump to the assumption that, yeah, this is all like a secret group trying to take over society.
I don't know. I hear what you're saying, but it wasn't very rigorous. I mean, it's an argument from ignorance mostly. I mean, like I would have the same view if I only had available this information, which strictly speaking is about all that I have, because I haven't looked into it. But since I haven't looked into it, I'm as um warranted to say that one is the a viable option as the other, right?
Well, I mean, I suppose so. It's the question though is for me to jump to the assumption that this man who initiated this idea is part of that movement in that group. That's that's unfounded for me, right? And I bind myself to not only trying to avoid cognitive biases and logical fallacies, but I fall into them all the time. But I'm also bound by some moral restraints that I believe reflect sort of what God teaches in the scriptures, and that I don't want to um, I don't want to assume a motive of someone um, too quickly, right? I don't. I want to be careful not to defame the name of this person. Um,
which I've highlighted for everyone there. Yeah.
um, and and I think that that's the risk that happens is we quickly dehumanize people in the process of sort of developing these conspiracy um, theories, and we do it in a way as if somehow we think that because it's sort of this battle of good versus evil, I'm justified kind of demonizing this other person. Now, I have no problem with acknowledging if someone has publicly done something that's wrong and it needs to be called out. I understand that there's a time to do that. Um, and yet, where I get nervous is that I think we live in a time where many of us are too quick to take that jump, and that's now. I mean, I can get your point though, where you would say that, wow, I mean, knowing you, you could pretty easily imagine a scenario where this 15-minute city could be abused, right?
Well,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, pretty
no
much anyone
question.
anyone with a head on their shoulders could imagine a scenario.
Right. So imagining the possibility that it could be abused and going to the point where you are convinced that there is a secret group trying to use this in an abusive way, like that's the part where I think it just requires some
Yeah.
really careful thinking and care before we jump to something like that.
So I think my like if I were to add a new notion to our definition of a conspiracy theorist, um like it can, to me, if I'm gonna think of that person, it's someone who has not really actually taken the time. I don't know if I can say that because I know a lot of conspiracy theorists who know a lot of stuff, and the way they piece it together is a little fishy sometimes. But a lot of times, the conspiracy theorist hasn't done the legwork to come to a conclusion, and they just jump to it the way that you describe it.
Right.
So for in a case like this, my method would be like if I had the inclination, let's find out where he's getting his money, what organizations he's working with, read the mission statements to those organizations and things of that sort. If I
Right.
ever got to the point where I invoked what some might call a conspiracy on it, I would I would be able to make an argument for it. I wouldn't even say anything until I thought I had done the legwork for it. I just wouldn't say nothing.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
But what would you say though, Tony, about like um I know there's this concept of like a epistemological humility.
Hmm.
Like so so there's this position of saying, well, there's no conspiracy here, there's no ill will, there's no there's nothing here. That's one side, which strikes me as potentially naive. Like if you go through life just assuming that everything is like roses and everyone is
Right.
well-meaning,
Yeah.
you can find yourself in some pretty dangerous positions and not be able
Correct.
to protect your loved ones if
Right.
you have that naive kind of view.
Yep.
You can also go the other extreme and assume that well, I actually do go the other extreme to the extent that I think that all of us have ill intent, like we're born with this disease called sin, and
Uh-huh.
it does infect our thinking and our actions a lot. But the idea of it being sort of a systematic, intentional effort, that's a systematic, structured, intentional effort, that's like the other extreme in my mind, and I see a lot of merit in actually standing in that gap of saying, there seems to be some evidence that, like, there's no question that this could be misused if it gets into the hands of the wrong people. And we have seen many examples of things getting in the hands of the wrong people in government and others. We could go to the Tuskegee experiment. Like, we could go to all these different things that have
Yeah.
been, that people called conspiracies and turned out to be true, right?
Right.
Um, and therefore, I am going to approach this with some caution. Like, you could, right? Someone could say that, and it's just not as media worthy, right? It's not going to draw people in as much to have that kind of sort of tentative position, and it's much more exciting for people to hear someone just flat out say, "I think this guy is part of the Illuminati." You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
like, this guy's
Yeah.
clearly part of the Illuminati, and he's trying. And you jump to that narrative, and then you begin to craft a narrative that's more compelling, and try to convince people that it's true just by um, uh, the rhetoric that you use, by the, and I'm not using rhetoric in a negative way. I mean rhetoric meaning
Yeah.
your persuasion, your skills in persuasion and storytelling.
So are you distinguish like did I feel like I was in that camp of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so okay.
I wasn't accusing you.
Okay. I wasn't sure. The setup was like, well, have you thought about how you're wrong?
No, no, no. I didn't mean it that way.
I think this is a really good example though of the kinds of things that we should be they should be on our radar. And the irony is, this one is not on mine, because I live out in the country for a reason. Like, it's not my problem, and that's the way I've designed things. But I think there is another side of this. The people who might dismiss it just as quickly as they might accept it is, well, there's no way that anyone could possibly have nefarious reasons behind it. They could not possibly have an agenda, and just brush it off in that sense. Maybe this is what you're trying to
Yep.
say. So it's like in the middle where, well, we don't know, but we should have our eyes open, right?
Right. Yeah, no question. I mean, there's an opposite to that reactive devaluation that I said too, or maybe this is part of the bandwagon effect or something else. Maybe there's a bias I'll have to read up on, and I mean, if we need to give it a name, we don't have to, but just
Yeah.
to acknowledge that sometimes we give, it's it's like the opposite of a straw man, in the sense that we like someone, so we are more easily convinced by their arguments. What is that called? There must be a name for that too. You may know.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who does that with me, so I've never experienced it. Yeah, yeah. Where were you going with that?
I don't know. I think that I went everywhere I was intending.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so some of
Oh,
the
it's here. There is actually. I just looked it up. I was curious. The halo effect is what it's called.
okay.
When you have an overall positive impression of a person because they're likable, attractive, charismatic, successful, something like that, and it causes you to overestimate their trustworthiness or their intelligence or um, something like that. So
Okay.
there you go. Halo. That makes a lot of sense too. The halo effect.
Yeah, so OJ Wolf Smasher, you were wrong. He actually brought up the Steel Man earlier. So he
Yeah.
was aware of it when he refused to invoke it this time. Yeah. I like to needle OJ because he can't reply in real time. So, I mean, he's restricted to text, so it's fun.
Yeah.
Um, so my experience with fluoride is actually very kind of like the trajectory of this 15-minute city thing. I could see it unfolding. So when fluoride wasn't something that I ever thought about at all, like, period. And then two things happened at once. Um, One, my daughter was diagnosed with spina bifida, and I found out that no one knows what the cause of it is. So I was suddenly kind of alert to possible causes. And two, my local community was considering getting fluoride, and I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing about it beyond that. But I had uh, the impetus to say, okay, this, we can't just be playing around with things. We don't know what the cause of this or that is. I'm going to look into it, and um, now I could spin a fairly good conspiracy theory about fluoride where I am these days, but if I did, it would be, one factoid after another. And I'm comfortable talking about that. And I mention it because a lot of the same people who would be for the 15-minute city are exactly the kind of people who would be like, oh, I've got a great idea. Let's put a chemical in the water. And who knows? It'll be great. And that's like literally the end of the thought. And yeah, I don't even know why I brought that up.
No, we certainly have a lot of those types of things in society, and that's part of why I see. I don't think everyone's going to see eye to eye on this. We're going to have some differences and the like, but what I do see some real merit on, especially when it comes to these types of things. I'm talking outside of the religious domain, especially too, just kind of daily life kinds of things like this. Um, but um, to at least try to put our best thinking into the situation. Even if two people conclude, one concludes it's a valid conspiracy, and others conclude it's more of a conspiracy theory, and others are kind of in the middle somehow. That we're going to get better results, I'm assuming, if we can at least put our best thinking and we can acknowledge some of the biases and the logical fallacies and these other things, and just challenge one another to think more deeply about it. You know. I think that's part of my goal here. And as someone who works at a university, that's part of what I hope a university education is at its best. Is it's actually teaching people to cultivate wisdom and to think deeply. And once you think you're at the roots, dig 3 or 4 feet deeper and
Yeah.
go a little deeper and a little deeper and refine their skills of thinking and analysis. And I get so concerned, for example, in this kind of AI infested world, that it seems like more and more people are relegating their most important thinking sometimes to AI, like this kind of moral reasoning and um, the kind of deep analysis and so forth. I mean, the language model that's used in AI is going to tell you what you want to hear or tell you what the predominant voice
Hmm.
wants is saying. Its data set. Um, and that's part of why I think I'm increasingly interested in having these kinds of conversations around what seems like sort of like these fringe topics at times. Um, but these are perfect grounds for practicing and refining our skill and thinking clearly.
So it's interesting if you think about discourse and how it's changed just since you and I and our audience has matured, because I know how old OJ is, and JB. I guess I don't know how old they all are, but um, in 1990, when you had a conversation, it was face to face, and if you knew anything, it came from really only two places: a book you got at the library, or the television news. I mean, there just wasn't a whole lot of sources beyond that. And then when the internet came, all of a sudden there were the floodgates of information was
Yeah.
unloaded on us as a society. And a lot of us, I don't know about you, but like I like relished it. I loved it. I love being able to say, oh, I've always wondered about this, now I can find out. And so it went until, I don't know if I could put a year on it, maybe 2005, 2007. Then it got to the point where you couldn't trust anything you saw on the internet. Like it does not matter if you see it on a quote peer reviewed site. You've got people submitting fabricated studies just as jokes to see if they can. Right, that's happened. Brett Weinstein, I think, did that. Wasn't that who it was? Am I getting the name right?
I don't remember. I mean, there have been several
Yeah,
examples of
yeah,
it, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
There have been, and obviously, if you venture anywhere onto social media, it's like there's just no way. And so it's actually become even harder to have conversations with people about anything because people could be getting their information from anywhere and those sources could be of all sorts of different quality, and you have to have a long conversation about the sources that people are
Yeah.
using before you can talk about the thing you wanted to talk about.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more work
Right.
to do. It's a lot more work, and so that's where that's where I was going. Is I mean, we could just invest our whole time. A person could spend a whole lifetime studying one of these topics that
Yeah.
we've brought up to try to get to the bottom of things and understand it as a conspiracy theory or as an actual conspiracy or something like that. But um, but I think at least at a baseline, if we can just learn to identify some of the basics, I think we can get our way through quite a bit. There's a quite a bit more there. Um, like you brought up the fluoride example, which is something that I haven't researched. I mean, I know that when you go to the dentist, they ask you if you want it now, which they
Hmm.
probably didn't before. And I don't know if that's because of threats of like legal threats, or they want to prevent the chance of a lawsuit, or if consent has just become a more significant thing in the healthcare field, or what the reasons are. But some people would say, well, they're asking me because there's research now and they know the truth. They know that this is really bad for me or something like that. Um, but I approach it just saying, well, I haven't read any of the literature, but they're clearly asking me, so it could be any number of reasons. And I think the first two that I listed are probably the most likely, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, someday maybe we'll talk about fluoride. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. Oops, I hit my microphone there. Because we've talked about some serious issues, but we didn't talk about the most important one. This was the this was the conspiracy theory that you were going to have us talk about.
Yeah, that's right. So there was a guy. This one is there was a guy who I don't know his whole story or background, but uh, I think he was in a town where he found himself being the contrarian quite a bit and grew up sort of arguing with people over ideas and truth claims and maybe politics and other ideas and like. And somehow, I think I'm probably butchering the story, the background story, but somehow he decided to write a kind of uh, a I don't know what you would call it, like a um, what's the term? I'm losing my
Uh,
words here now, but just sort of a spoof or something like that,
yeah.
where he makes the claim that birds are not real. They're actually all drones that are watching us, and it's a surveillance state thing or something like
Uh-huh.
that. And uh, a nice claim. And what's intriguing about it is while he did it as a joke, that I've was browsing a little bit, and it appears that there's some people that are attached to it. Like they're thinking there's
Yeah.
some truth to his claim. Like,
Right.
okay, well maybe it's not every bird, but
Right.
maybe there are quite a few. How many birds are
Yeah.
there that are actually drones?
Yeah, and unfortunately there are drones that look like birds now. So you just can't
Right.
win for losing. And actually that's one of the distinguishing parts of just about any quote conspiracy theory you might bring up is like the first group might know that it's a joke or might know where the weak points are, but inevitably other people glom on. And then a lot of these things take on a life of their own, and then by the time you and I hear about them, we're 20 steps removed. And now we have to like wade through all of the chaff to find out, what is going on. What where did this even come from?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and people get caught into this trap, that's why they end up, you have very thoughtful people that are sharing completely false things on social media sometimes
Yeah.
because they come across it and it's so true. It's like it's convincing, it supports their belief system and worldview. And so they're like, well, it probably is true. So I'm sharing this one. I got to get the
Right.
word out about it.
Right.
And and then it turns out sometimes those can be a little bit embarrassing for people, I realize.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like to approach it from this kind of try to be a little bit humble about it is we're all susceptible to that. We really are. Um, I feel badly sometimes, like with my kids, I would like make up things to be kind of playful and tell fictional stories and all. And I realized that I took it too far on one family vacation when my daughter reached over to my son and said, "Dad cannot be trusted." Like when my son said, "Really, Dad?" And my I hope she just meant that in a small way, but that's
Yeah. We never know what they carry with them, do we? Yeah. So did we cover all three of yours? It was the
generally, what did we get to for you?
um well, we got Jesus. I already I already forgot well, I was going to do cold fusion.
Oh,
Um we have a physicist in the chat. Now I'm afraid to bring up cold fusion.
well, go for it. If you have a physicist in the chat,
Yeah, he'll set me straight, right?
I know nothing about cold fusion, so
So this
well,
was
I mean, I
my
know the software a little bit,
yeah.
but
Okay, so there were we didn't get to two of mine, I guess. So the cold fusion one was my kind of more a little bit goofy one, something that I have not actually researched a lot and I don't have an opinion on. But it was 1989, so I would have been, I don't know, 17 or 18. I'm 15. I haven't done the math, but um, it was a scientific experiment where they supposedly had managed to generate a small amount of extra heat out of a reaction, and it all happened like on a tabletop. There was no like great nuclear thing, and there was no radiation, and supposedly no one could replicate it, and that's why it died. But then when you look into it, you find out that a lot of the people who tried to quote replicate it were people who had vested interest in it not working, right? So now they've come around, and I don't think they've. My impression from my looking, uh, refreshing myself on this topic, is that they're not talking cold fusion, but they're talking about low energy nuclear something or another's. So like it's kind of like the UFO thing. They've refashioned it into something that doesn't have baggage anymore. And now they can talk about it again. And now they're working on it. But you didn't know anything about this, so
not really. I can't really speak to it at all. I mean, except to say though that I think the way that this plays out is so I'm not saying it is or isn't a conspiracy because I just don't know a lot conspiracy theory. I don't know a lot about it. I mean, but I can say that conspiracy theories um, they are fueled by stories, right? That
right.
that generally it's not like people are sitting down and arguing over the research papers on the subject, but
Right.
instead they're fueled by stories about ulterior motives. Usually, motive is a big part of a conspiracy theory. If like it's focused upon it, so because I mean another way of approaching this is if let's say if someone again I'm not claiming any knowledge of the situation, but um, what's the best way to prove that someone has ulterior motives? Um, I mean, I guess you could find some documentation where they just flat out describe their ulterior motives. That would be one.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but the other question then is, do ulterior motives mean that they succumb to that motive. Like, there's this claim that, for example, I as a Lutheran Christian, I'm a pretty, biblically conservative person. Not pretty, I am, and um, some people could assume that I'm incapable of doing just dispassionate, logical thinking on a
Hmm.
topic that just sort of neutrally follows the facts wherever they might lead. Because they say, well, you're
Lutheran,
you're biased.
yeah.
You're gonna let your these other things kind of shine through. Um,
Well,
but I
Lutheran
can
Christians
engage
are
in
known to fly off the handle. They're a very
That's right. But
enthusiastic bunch.
I can engage in this exercise, and even in that's kind of what gameplay is. I mean, in some ways, when you're doing a thought experience, when you're playing a game, you choose to operate by the rules of the game,
Right.
and you're operating within them. Doesn't mean that I personally embody and love and believe in all of the rules of the game, but I can follow the rules of the game, and I can do the thought experiment and saying, assuming these rules of the game, here's where it would lead me,
Yeah.
or not. And I think that's part of what disappears a lot of time when we get into the conspiracy theories is we sort of throw that way of thinking out, and we instead love talking about um, the the stories and the um, kind of behind the scenes conversations that allegedly happen. That, even going back to the whole question about sort of aliens or UFOs or whatever, the one thing that does cause me to be a little bit more skeptical is how much it's based upon sort of these stories of people, um,
Right. Yeah.
individually.
Yeah. So the problem is that is how you find out stuff is because someone
Yeah.
gets the story out. So
Sure, and
it's
I
tough.
mean it's a useful way. I mean, we discover lots of important truths through story. So I don't want to
Yeah.
throw it out or diminish it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that sometimes when that's all of the evidence, it's all just based upon those things. Sometimes
Right.
um, that's a sign to just be alert that maybe
Yeah.
there's some conspiracy thinking going on.
So as you're talking, it made me think about this ability or willingness to just sort of deal with an idea for the sake of the idea, to play the game according to the rules.
Yeah,
And I think that is that surfaces in a lot of discussions that I've gotten into over the years. Um, I'm not saying that I haven't occasionally gotten passionate about a topic, but why you're laughing a little harder than I thought you would on that.
well, but we all have. I mean, that's
Yeah.
like
um, but I do think that one of the things that has gotten me into trouble is actually that ability. Like people get so invested in what is we're talking. Well, maybe I should say invested, but like there's something going on in their world in regards to that premise, and they're bringing a lot of baggage to it, and I'm just like, well, let's talk about it. Have you thought about this? No, man, no, I'm not going to think about that.
yeah.
Um, and I can think of a couple times where I almost got in real trouble just by talking about the premise that they were presenting. Like,
I could think of a specific example, and this one could get me in trouble. If someone pulled out a section of this as a soundbite, it could really misrepresent me. So I'll
okay,
take a risk here.
all right,
But I remember years ago, it was one of these spring break hiking trips in college, and we did different hiking trips. We went down to. I remember we did a series of hikes in Texas and other places on spring break, and I think it was a spring break. It might have been one of those other kind of college backpacking hiking trips that was done. And a friend, we have a mutual friend, and multiple mutual friends from college, and I was walking along, and um, I was kind of pondering the Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God,
mm-hmm,
as I'm walking through nature and sort of the beauty of this, and as a Christian, when I look at nature, I'm not. I see that it points me to something beyond nature. It points me to a creator beyond that, right? And and the scriptures kind of point me to that. And yet, on this particular walk, I was reflecting on that, and just simply doing this, kind of playing the rules of the game, trying to put myself in the mind or the shoes of another person. I said to this friend, I said, I think I can understand a little bit. I can picture how someone might be drawn into like worship of the items that they see in nature.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
I was not condoning it. I was not
Yeah.
suggesting that it was a good thing or that it was true or anything like that. What I was trying to point out was that, um, I could see how you could get so caught up in the immediate beauty that
Yeah.
you maybe wouldn't look beyond it to, like,
Right.
the creator of that beauty, right? And the source of that beauty. And, this person, I remember being very upset with me. Um, I mean, it was very passionately upset, like, as if I don't think this is what they were actually doing, but as if they felt as if I'd kind of crossed a line,
Mm.
maybe a moral line or something like that. Or it could also have been just a fear that maybe they misunderstood what I was saying and they thought that somehow I was changing religions on them or something like that. Like that
Right.
could have been that. Um,
You did read a lot of Buddhist stuff in college.
that was later. That was my 29 to 32 phase of
Okay.
reading different world religions. I have different eras where I would read about different philosophies
Uh-huh.
and things. I read existentialist literature for 3 years, and then I read like different things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So your example is a lot like what Richard Dawkins says in The Blind Watchmaker about design. I mean, he lauds how my word here, beautiful the world is, and he said the argument for design it's never really even been put in its full strength. I mean, it's so compelling out there, and yet it's just a figment, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
it's
that's where he goes. I
right.
think I might have actually been reading I don't know when it came out. I might have been reading The Selfish Gene at the time, so I was
Uh,
trying to make sense of sort of his way of thinking or something
yeah,
like that. It could have been. That's a possibility
yeah,
because that was about the right time when I think I was reading some of that stuff
yeah,
to just kind of as a because I wanted to understand the different viewpoints. And of course, I was coming at it from a Christian perspective, pretty confident in my beliefs, but I wanted to understand maybe how I
yeah.
could communicate with other people.
I think there's another topic kind of in the wings about how there's actually a rise in paganism, and I'm not using that in a pejorative sense, but like just this almost nature worship, just new age type stuff, that has risen right alongside and parallel all of our advances in science and technology, because you've got people who are looking at how amazing things are. They're not willing to make the leap to God, but they're still not willing to just say, well, it all reduces to mud, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I wonder too if that's not a kind of contemporary representation of a kind of romanticism, like the
Mm,
romantic era and too, and very much like with the cognitive biases we talk about, falling in love with a story so much so that you become even less interested in whether it's factual or not, but it's true to you. True
mhm,
meaning true being redefined as it resonates with you in some
right.
way, or you relate with it. Um, you connect. It's a story that you want to use to kind of make sense of the world, and that is I do see that as a growing kind of perspective that in some ways it makes sense given people being bombarded with all these truth claims and informations and finding difficulty like where am I going to go with this. Well, if I can just find a story that I like and
Mhm.
attach to that, that can give me a little feeling of safety or security. I mean, I think that's part of why that happens. That's part of why I'm kind of being an advocate for being a champion for clear thinking and trying to clarify our thinking and acknowledge some of those, some of these biases and things like that.
So we're gonna wrap it up here, I think. maybe. But one of your other theories that you were going to possibly have us talk about was whether or not we went to the moon. And
I know.
that we were going to tie into the fact that that I published your book Missional Moonshots, and how if we had not gone to the moon, that would have totally reframed your book about moonshots.
Absolutely. I mean, the book Missional Moonshots was about the premise was that JFK challenged people to send a man to the moon and bring him back safely within a decade, and they began these series of experiments and challenges and charges until they accomplished it. And so I was using that as a metaphor for taking on wicked problems or bold visions and organizing yourself to find success even beyond, and navigating the challenges. That was sort of the premise of the book, and doing that in especially in education environments. But I guess if it had never happened, then a moonshot would be successfully convincing people that you were successful in something that you never did.
Yeah,
So that'd be a very different book, I guess.
yeah, and that must be a thing anyway. But maybe this was my conspiracy bone. But the fact that we don't know about it kind of scares me.
Yeah.
It means they won. I hate that.
Well, there is I think, isn't there a planned visit to the moon in like 2029 or something like that?
Is there really?
Sometime in the next 5 years. Uh, I think there's a group that's working. I don't know if it's NASA or whomever, but I thought there was a planned visit to the moon
Well, I'm
that's
really
on the radar
surprised
again.
that Elon is so gunning for going to Mars. It seems to me that a moon base would be like the preliminary thing, but I don't think I've ever heard him talk about going to the moon.
Yeah, I think a Mars shot is much grander, so maybe he's underwhelmed with
That's
a
right.
simple jump over to. That's like going to vacation in the town next door.
Yeah.
Going to, you gotta go
Right.
on a grand adventure.
Yeah, yeah. One of my other conspiracy theories was going to be simulation stuff, but I decided not to
Oh,
do that.
well, by the way, I am actually, I have the Lutheran Education Association conference is one that I'm presenting at. I have a few presentations, and I always try to stretch myself and my audience with the topics. And I'm curious what people think. They don't really know what the topic is actually about. The title could be a little bit deceptive,
Sure.
but the title of one of my presentations is something like "The First Christian School on Mars."
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
We'll just leave
So
it
people are
there.
gonna have to I'm still
Okay.
building the presentation,
Yeah, I
but,
see.
um,
Okay.
but the
Cliffhanger.
the premise of it is actually not necessarily going to be the first Christian school on Mars, but it's about, planning for the future and planning future models of Christian education beyond maybe what we've imagined
You don't
recently.
have to give it away. It's fine. I would have let
Yeah,
it go. It's
and
fine.
and it's all then okay, then maybe it has something to do with Mars too. We'll let
Yeah,
people
okay.
wonder.
All right. Well, we've gone over, and I appreciate your time, and I want to be conscientious about the time. I miss these talks. I miss the days when like six of us would be in a room until 2 a.m. and at 2 a.m. you weren't saying anything smart anymore, but it was still
I'm
a
pretty
good
sure I was sleeping.
conversation.
That was like in the days of coffee. Now I don't even do caffeine anymore. So I
That's
like I
right.
do my like caffeine-free mushroom coffee or something today, or herbal
Oh,
tea.
it's like I don't even know you. All right. So if you will just hold on after I say goodbye to everyone, I'll come back and we can just chat just a little bit. So
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
you bet. Thank you. And let's get to here. There we go. No one can hear you now, Dr. Bull. They can only hear me. So as it happens, I did have another conspiracy theory that I chose not to bring up, and I'm not even going to say it now. I'm going to save it for another time. Um, but I was really itching, but I just knew there was no way we could do it in respectively in 15 to 20 minutes. And I already kind of I'm hurting. Like I brought up the fluoride thing, and Like my brain is like feels like it's in a box. Like it just wants to explode with all the things it wants to say about fluoride, and I was not able to say like any of it because the format and the time and stuff. So I don't know. I'm gonna go have to go walk around the block or something, or I don't know, collect the eggs from the chicken coop. Yeah,
I read enough about it to know that there's some concerns, you know.
yeah, yeah. So I, you started talking, but no one could hear you. So I'm doing my sign off right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
So,
So yeah. So anyway, let's go back to me. So maybe someday we'll do a thing on fluoride. I guess that was kind of my point on that. But what I can say is in 2 days for sure, I have a special uh, session. I'm gonna have a firefighter friend here in my office. Pat Sousa and I have known each other almost since I moved here. Um, I guess it's been almost, yeah, 10 years or so. And we're coming off of the incident in Idaho where two firefighters were killed by a sniper. Um, you know, it's going to be a really good conversation with somebody who really cares about people and has invested uh, many years of his life, 30 years of his life, helping people in the capacity of a EMS and as a firefighter. So I hope that on Thursday you will come again, watch it live because we're really hoping to get some um, participants to give some questions about being a volunteer firefighter, that kind of thing. So, since I've gone so long in the evening, I'm just going to wrap it up with that. My name is Anthony Horvath, the host of the Gutencast. We've got links to our books in the description. Follow us on social media. And we're just going to leave it right there. Thanks for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Have a good night.